Welcome to the F4 podcast, where your hosts, Brian, Brooke, Charles, and Vanessa, discuss all things faith, family, friends, and fitness. What is F4? Sometimes it's a glimpse into how we navigate the world, and sometimes it's a deep dive into how we handle the four main areas of our lives. If you want to have a healthier relationship with God, family, friends, and yourself, this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this episode.
Welcome to episode 17 of the F4 podcast. I am Brian Marston, one of the F4 hosts, and I'm honored to be taking our podcast off the shelf and dusting it off today since we have not podcasted since July of 2022. It's been a long time. Mm-hmm. In case you didn't know, we've had a lot happen since that point in time. This past July, we found out our gym had to relocate to a new space, which isn't easy. Let me say, moving it was hard. And we had a lot of amazing volunteers and people show up to help make it happen. And it took a few hours, give or take. But yeah, like at least two. But we got it done, and it's been a fun adventure getting it rolling in a new location. Also, on top of this, Charles and I are continuing to move toward completing our Master's of Divinity degrees from Liberty University Online, and I should be done in May. So happy. It's been a lot of years. And Charles will be done in August?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, it's going to be good. And the CrossFit Open is coming up, which, are you ready?
I guess we'll see, right?
All of our hopes and dreams rest on Brooke.
Right.
But regardless, we're glad to be back with you this month. And let me just say, we appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch our podcast. And if you could follow us, it would be wonderful because we're on Instagram. And we're also on multiple platforms, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Pocket, Radio Public, Breaker, Anchor, and YouTube. If you would like to be a sponsor of the show, which we don't have any right now, you can send us a message on Instagram, Facebook, or via email to f4ncpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to be the first, come on, bring it. That's what I say. As usual, I'm joined today by the F4 people, my wife Brooke, and our fabulous friends Charles and Vanessa Giddens. Say hi, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for that. Let me say up front, this episode is a byproduct of something I think about often, and it's not sex. It's marriage. Brooke and I have been married 24 years, and well, actually next month. I've kind of rushed that one there. 24 years next month, and we have stepped into a new year, and the Holy Spirit has been working on me and convicting me that I need to make some adjustments and changes to love her better. One of the ways I've done this is I've picked up a marriage book called Creating an Intimate Marriage by Dr. Jim Burns. Charles is holding up a copy right now. And it's an older book. I think he wrote it in like 2006, but the principles still apply today. And I've loved reading the practical content contained in that book. So much so that next month, this month, end of this month, I'll be leading a small group with married couples through the book. And I'm looking forward to it because I think it's going to be really helpful. It's been helpful for me and really, really challenging. Brooke and I have also had the opportunity to sit down with a lot of couples over the years, some of them on the brink of divorce. And we've seen them rekindle their love and romance by making some changes and adjustments. And primarily it's with their communication and approaches to one another. We've also witnessed how thriving marriages lead to thriving families. That's a tongue twister, geez. And they lead to thriving communities. And if you want healthy kids, I would say to prioritize a healthy marriage. And I deeply personally desire to influence people to passionately pursue life-giving connections with Jesus, their families, and their communities. And this motivates me to want to leverage my time to help people thrive in their marriages. So today, I want to have a free-flowing conversation with Brooke, Vanessa, Charles, and we want to talk about love and marriage, with the hope of inspiring each other and you to make more life-giving connections in your marriages, assuming you're married. And if you're not married, well, I would recommend taking notes because there may be some things you learn today that help you in your marriage, but there are also things that could help you in your other relationships. So even if you're not married, you can find some application here. On this first question, I want to ask you guys, you're all going to get a turn. Brooke, and you're going to get to go first.
Yay.
I can hear the excitement in your voice. So what are a couple things that get in the way of people having a great marriage?
Jobs, responsibility, money, kids. That's more than two. Really, I mean, all of those things, I think. But probably most of all, I would say all of that boils down to selfishness. I think.
Oh, I thought you were going to say kids.
No, I mean, I think we all have a way that we want things. We all have things that we want. And I think that sometimes, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that is the thing that gets in the way of having successful or what feels like a great marriage. So, but all those other things contribute, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. So you said kind of summed up with selfishness.
Mm-hmm. But responsibility. Any other just responsibilities outside of it, I think, make it challenging.
So Charles just about threw a pin at you.
Did I take your answer?
I think you were offended. He's over there like taking more notes really fast right now.
You get to go first later. You can take all the good answers then.
We'll give him like what makes marriage fail.
Okay.
All right. Well, Charles, why don't you go ahead and go next since you seem so engaged in this question, which I like.
Oh, well, so kids activities specifically, busy lives, lack of awareness. For me, and the selfish piece, we'll get to that, I'm sure, like 8 million times on every question, but selfishness is something I've dealt with a lot over the last couple of months and really processed, but I think Brooke's right. Selfishness really goes back to the root of everything that we get through, not just with marriage, but in life in general. And I would say two other things that I wrote down that Brooke actually didn't take my answer on, so I might be taking somebody else's answer, but attitude and expectations. And attitude's a pretty basic one, but expectations really go back to the selfish piece. And I've done a lot of soul searching on expectations after reading Jim Burns' book and just in general. And expectations have a way of really just completely decimating relationships if we let them get out of control. So
the dog said amen. All right. How about you, Vanessa?
I agree wholeheartedly with the selfishness piece. I think if we were to create a marriage emotion wheel, selfishness would be at the center and everything else sort of expands. The only thing that I had to add is fear.
That's good.
I think fear can keep you from opening up in any relationship. Fear of being hurt, fear of being whatever hurt, I guess, is the bottom line. But not being as open with people as you could be, not giving of yourself as you should. That's it. Selfishness and fear.
Yeah. So with fear, have you seen that when you've had hurts from the past, that's played a big part in it? When you've had hurts in your closest relationships in the past, has that played a big part when it comes to fear in a marriage relationship?
For me personally, sure.
I think it's for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we're going to get to this a little bit later, but I'm the only person at this table who is the product of divorce. So I come into the whole thing with different expectations different examples that have been set. And I know we'll get more into that later. But yeah, so selfishness and fear. And I think for me, a lot of times the two go hand in hand. It's my selfishness comes out in the form of self-preservation.
That's well said. I think that's true for a lot of people. I have one more question of you because I'm interested, and I think maybe you have a unique perspective here based on what you've already shared. When you say self-preservation, what are you trying to protect yourself from?
Hurt, essentially, abandonment. That's been a pretty pervasive theme in my life, and it's not fun. So it's not a fun feeling to not feel wanted or important. So
I think a lot of people don't talk about that because it requires vulnerability to do it, which thank you on question one. Hello. But I appreciate you being vulnerable like that because I think a lot of people that are listening will connect with what you're saying. And who knows what conversations may come as a result of it.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Yeah, so I wrote down a lot of things, and I don't want to say them all, but I wrote down this idea of a lack of personal awareness, but then a lack of others' awareness, and then a lack of God awareness. And so I think there's an awareness of self that I feel like that's a lifelong thing. That as you spend time immersing yourself, let's say in our case, God's Word, there are things revealed to us that we need to change. And we hopefully make those changes and we're like, oh gosh. Or if we interact with people in friendship or in a family or with work, it's like, okay, I'm going to need to make these changes based on sometimes failure and people pointing things out. If you start to hear something consistently over time, it's like, okay, you need to pay attention to that. And a lot of people, their guard is up so much, it's like they've never really gained self-awareness. But so much of my self-awareness has been gained through God awareness. And then actually getting to the point of looking to the interest of others, like Paul writes about in Philippians chapter 2. That's that others awareness. And I think learning about the temperaments really helped us in that regard. Knowing how God has wired and made other people differently and speaking in a way that is helpful for them, not just in what's helpful for me, can really help, but it also has gotten in the way of having a great marriage in the sense that I've lacked self-awareness at times. I've lacked Brooke awareness in this case. I've lacked God awareness because maybe I've ignored things or I haven't internalized them or been consistent at certain times in my life and really saying, God, my life is yours. So that's probably the thing that jumped out the most to me from those three angles. But a couple other things I'll just share and not elaborate on is like a fast pace. Brooke is not a fast-paced person naturally. I am, but it still doesn't bring out the best in me. I may be productive, but not relationally productive because a fast pace isn't conducive to great relationships. But it's taken me a long time to learn that. So learn from my failure. One other thing I'll share and then I'll move on is a lack of empathy, which I think is in the others awareness category primarily. But I've had to grow in that area and am growing and looking at it from how does someone else feel. Sometimes I've been dismissive of that. Brooke will never say that, but I will. All right.
Do you need me to say it?
I'm bleeding right now on the inside.
I won't say it.
All right, so the second question. Everyone will also get a turn on this one as well. Charles, you get to go first this time. How do you feel about that?
It's great.
Yeah. The last will be first. All right. So what are a couple of things that help a marriage thrive?
So I feel like if I answer what I actually wrote down, that I'll just do it to her anyway. It's fine. Empathy. I think empathy helps a marriage thrive. I think honesty. For me, loyalty. And there are a couple other things, especially getting into what Jim Burns wrote that I'm still processing, but I'm not going to cover all that. But I think empathy, honesty, and loyalty for me are the three that really, knowing someone may not understand specifically what I'm going through, but can relate to me in that aspect is pretty important, because I think at times, and you guys know this, and maybe not everybody knows this, I've gone through a period of pretty severe anxiety at times where Vanessa doesn't understand. She doesn't get it because she doesn't have that same problem. But for her to be empathetic with me in that regard, I think really helps settle that down for me. So much so that, in a lot of cases, I feel very safe around Vanessa. I think honesty, for me, it's one of the biggest things that I've always kind of grown up on. Although it's challenging at times for all of us. I think if we're not honest with each other, specifically in our relationships on what's working well or what's not working well, or really just anything, you're never, no matter how great the empathy is or how great the loyalty is, you're never going to get to where you need to be, because if you're not being honest, you're not showing your true self. So someone's not going to be able to relate to you that well, and you're not going to be able to connect if you're lying about things. And even if it's, we talked about this in the past, but even if it's things like leaving out details where you're not necessarily purposely lying, I think all of that is a really big deal. And I think, we can frame things up, and it goes back to being selfish. Like, you can frame every situation and everything up in your life in a way that you can say, oh, I'm not being dishonest, but you're leaving things out, and you're doing it because you want a certain outcome, because you want things to be the way you want them to be, which is an ultimate form of selfishness. And I think when you have that, you're never going to have a connection, a real connection anyway. You may get what you want temporarily, but you're not going to get it long term. And I think the loyalty piece for me is just gigantic. I mean, if you're not loyal to me, if you're in my close circle and you're not loyal to me, then there's not a whole lot that we have to discuss at that point. And some of that is earned, some of it's, just given, but I can't be open and honest and vulnerable with people that I don't feel that are loyal to me. It's very difficult. So then there's always a barrier there between me and that person, which is going to create a problem in that relationship. But if it's there, it really helps. It helps us thrive. It helps our friendships thrive, but it helps us thrive, I think, a lot. There's not a whole lot that I don't feel like I can't talk to her about, because I know she's loyal to me. So.
Very good. How about you, Vanessa? What helps a marriage thrive?
I think both seeing and being seen are super important. Recognizing when our spouse is under stress, whether they've brought it on themselves or not. And also having our spouse recognize when we are in a position where we need help and we're not asking for it, whatever, just being seen. I think having Jesus at the center of your relationship is super important. When we are better about those spiritual disciplines that we do together, our relationship is much better. It's like that, a 3-chord strand is not easily broken. And I also think good examples are important, and having not necessarily mentor type people, but people that you can go to for sound advice, people whose relationship you respect, and whether you have to actively seek those out because they weren't provided to you or whatever. If you have people that you can talk to through church or friends or hopefully family, but I think having good examples and people that will tell you you're being an idiot just as fast as they will, you don't necessarily want somebody that's just going to be, oh yeah, you guys had a fight, oh he's a jerk, you don't want somebody like that. You want somebody that's going to say, well, why did you do that? Or stop and think about it from his perspective. So I think all of those things are helpful.
I want to ask you too, when it comes to spiritual disciplines, what are some of the spiritual disciplines that you've done as a couple that have helped you thrive? And you can answer, either one of you can.
I mean, I think, and we talked about it the other day, I think the biggest thing for us that we've always, we're not currently doing it right now, but praying together every day, starting our day off that way has been and still will continue to be, I think, the biggest thing that we can do together. We both spend quiet time. There's no doubt about that. And we'll talk about things periodically that we're studying or reading. But it's not the same as sitting down and, spending 15 or 20 minutes praying together in the morning. That's a bigger deal and has been something that we've both found very good for our marriage. Unfortunately, some things have changed where I get up and I have to leave before Vanessa's even thinking about getting up. So that kind of changes some things. And, whether we need to adapt a different kind of lifestyle at night, then, that's what that means. And I'm going to have to kind of get over that because I like to be in bed early, just like she doesn't want to get up early. But I think if we really want to get back to it and get the excuses out of the way, I think that's the biggest thing that we can do as a family, as a marriage, but as a family together that really, to me, I've seen the biggest benefit from. And again, spending time on our own in the Word every day is important. And even doing that together would probably be every bit as important. But praying together, man, that's a completely different level. If you've never tried it, if you've never done it, it's fantastic. It really is. It really changes your entire outlook and your perspective as a couple, to me.
Yep. And that is, excuse me, one of the biggest things. And also just going to worship together, going to church together, doing small groups together as a couple, all of those, you tried for so long to get into a small group. And I was kind of like, well,
what's the big deal?
Right. And I didn't know what I was missing until we actually got connected in one.
Yeah. Well, even still now, you staying at church because we serve differently at church.
And that's the other big one, serving.
I'm on staff and Vanessa serves, but even getting the commitment to stay together after service till we watch it separately. My volunteers and I do. Our family ministry team watches service separately. Vanessa's in service live. But then Vanessa stays and does small group with all of us, which has been a big benefit for me and for us to listen to her process, what she learned, or have her listen to me, and us have connections and conversations on that. It's been good, and I'm glad that we do it. I'm glad she spends more time than she probably wants to at church, but it helps us out, I think, as a couple to be able to work through that during the week and continue to grow together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, excuse me, a lot of the small group is built toward application, and so if you're talking about what you're going to do in light of what you heard, then you're sharing that together. You kind of know what she's thinking and what he's thinking. So as opposed to maybe not talking about it because you get caught up in the busyness and the hustle, especially pursuing a master's, you're doing a lot in addition to the gym. You're doing a lot with the dog training. And then you've got a kid who's involved in a band that schedules all kinds of stuff that you may or may not know about until a couple days before. I mean, that's just kind of how it works. And I'm not covering everything. It's just a big part of life gets going, and we can drift away from the things that help us the most. Okay, well, Brooke, I want to switch over to you.
Well, you guys said a lot of good answers. So I'm going to say something that you didn't say, even though some of the things you said would have been my answers. I think intentional time together helps a marriage thrive. I think a lot of people, it's easy if you have two separate jobs and you have multiple kids, if you have a kid or if you have multiple kids, there's a lot that pulls you in different directions. And so intentional time together, I think, is very beneficial for helping a marriage thrive. And it could be a shared hobby, but I know some couples don't necessarily enjoy the same kind of hobbies, so it doesn't have to be that. I mean, I know we enjoy working out together. I think that has been good for our marriage.
Yeah, I like to see you squat.
Okay.
What?
Thanks. Thank you.
You're good at it.
I'm sure that's why.
Right. Okay, cool.
You can lift a lot of weight.
All right. So intentional time together, that's my answer. That's all I got.
Did I throw you off your game?
You did. You did.
Good.
Okay.
Vanessa and Charles are dog sitting, and Layla just said amen. Squat away. All right, so that's exactly what she meant. So I wrote, my first answer was sex can help a marriage thrive. It can. Do I have anybody disagreeing?
No.
I think that was Charles's first answer that he didn't say.
No, it's not.
Something's wrong with your microphone, Brooke.
Yeah, we're working on it.
All right. So that really wasn't my first answer, but I thought about it earlier, and I thought that would be a good answer because it's true. But one of them is a regular date night. Brooke and I have been doing that for years. And I was thinking about this yesterday about how, I've never met somebody or somebodies who are getting divorced or have been divorced who had a regular date night. Like I've never met somebody who is intentionally taking time to invest in a relationship with someone that made the decision, no, well, we can't work this out. We're going to get divorced. So that was one of the things that I think has helped our marriage thrive. They're not always feel good. Sometimes they've been not great. But the reason you want to do it regularly is you have those moments that aren't great, or maybe like Charles and Vanessa last night, you have a dining experience where you've got a bunch of yahoos sitting next to you who are getting plastered and yelling in the restaurant and like making it so difficult to even carry on a conversation. It's like a spectacle. But then sometimes things aren't going good between the two of you. Yet if you are showing up week in and week out saying, hey, we're going to do this, you're going to have some really good times. And so for us, that's been huge to help our marriage thrive. I think one of the things that we've not done regularly, we've done it probably more organically, is this idea of a daily check-in. The idea of talking about, hey, what was most satisfying about your day to day? And taking 10 minutes to do this. Like not 45 minutes or an hour, but 10 minutes to say, what was most satisfying about your day? What was the most dissatisfying about your day or least satisfying? And then finding a way to intentionally encourage one another to say, I really appreciated when you said my hair looked good. Or, of course, she doesn't say that to me, but something that would be a compliment. It could be, when you did the dishes and you knew that I was going to do them, but I got pulled away by that phone call and then you went ahead and did them and I wasn't expecting it. Without seemingly any expectation, which sometimes we know some people do things for expectation or with expectations, but because you love me, I think that's powerful and can help a marriage thrive. You guys have said a lot of good things. Communication is key. Being able to communicate in a way that you're being honest and assertive, yet not a jerk. And then at the same time, being able to actively listen and be able to actually hear what someone's saying as opposed to just the words, but actually hearing what's happening with the emotion, the thoughts, and believing the best in that communication, I think can go a long way. And I am a work in progress there. Brooke could tell you if you want to ask her. So, but don't do that. So the next question I have is, Jim Burns, who we've referred to in this podcast, he refers to our bank accounts and how we're either depositing into them or withdrawing from them. And I would love more deposits, as some of you probably would agree with. But we know that excessive withdrawals can lead to an overdrafted account where there is no more money and penalties are assessed as a result. So in a similar fashion, we all have emotional bank accounts in our marriages where too many withdrawals from those emotional bank accounts of our husband or wife will lead to major marriage problems. I want to ask you all, how have you seen this to be true? And I'll go first on this question because I haven't gone first yet. But the way I'd answer this question is, for me personally, drawing poor boundaries with work in the past has really hurt. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was in an office regularly, going away, being gone for the majority of the day, Brooke would try to find out when I was going to be home from dinner. And I would tell her a time. Brooke, how many times probably in our first year of marriage did I get home at that time?
I don't know. I wasn't keeping score.
You're a good woman. Yeah, so I know that I didn't keep that time a lot. And for me, I justified it. I was doing the work of the Lord and neglecting my wife in the process, which is not the work of the Lord. That's the work of the devil. But so poor boundaries have hurt me making those withdrawals. I would say in that a lack of attentiveness. So even now I work from home a lot, and I'm trying to really do a better job of stopping when she wants to have a conversation. But I know that over the years, I've hated to be interrupted when I'm mid-thought or mid-work. And so I've just kept looking down at a computer or at a book. And now she does the same thing to me. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't like this. And so I'm trying to change my ways. And then the last one I think that I thought of where I've probably withdrawn emotionally is speaking in extremes. You always, you never. They don't land well with Brooke. And I imagine they don't land well with anyone in a committed relationship. So I've been working on not speaking in extremes, but I have like my veiled version of speaking in extremes, like most of the time.
But what he means is
all of the
always.
time. Yeah.
Well, what's being heard is always and never.
Because that's what you mean.
Yeah. So they make major withdrawals, and so there's a few that I would say that I'm working on, or areas I'm growing in. How about you, Brooke?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way that you had this question worded in our notes, I interpreted a little bit differently. Big surprise.
That is okay.
But yes, I have absolutely seen that to be true, that there are things that make withdrawals from a relationship. But I think the thought that I had was that we don't always know exactly what is causing a withdrawal. Or sometimes when we think we're adding to that emotional bank account, what we're doing isn't really actually adding to that bank account. So, like, as an example, doing a task around the house, you may think, oh, I'm going to help her by doing this laundry that she has obviously not gotten to, and she is going to be so happy about this. No. And that probably isn't really adding very much to my emotional account. Not because I don't appreciate it, but just that's probably not the thing that's going to be adding an emotional deposit. And then by not being as excited about it as you expect, then actually I end up making a withdrawal from your emotional account unexpectedly. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think that's the thing that's hard about that. And you spoke to it in one of the other questions. I don't remember if it was the first one or the second one about thriving or what makes a great marriage, but that others awareness, and even self-awareness. I think that's where that really comes into play. Like, am I doing this because I want it done and I think it should make this person happy, or am I doing something for them that actually they would truly appreciate? Does that make sense?
Yeah. When you were talking, it made me think about the love languages, and just how knowing when you took the assessment years ago, quality time and physical touch were your top two, whereas mine were acts of service and words of affirmation. And this is where it goes sideways for me, is sometimes I feel like, man, I've been doing a lot of investing from a quality time standpoint, and yet it doesn't seem to be much of a payoff. And I know the problem is then I become selfish, which goes back to question number one, when like everyone said selfishness is the problem. But it's like, oh, gosh, I figured this investment, this deposit would bring about a bigger return than what it brought. And then that's why I kind of want to like, come on. You love this.
Interest rates are low.
Yeah, it's like, what can I do? Yeah, no, they're up now. Inflation.
And I think you bring up a really good point. It's something that I've been struggling with, not to take Vanessa's question, but I think when you go back to, I'm really making an investment because I'm looking for a payoff. Well, at the end of the day, you're actually being selfish. You know what I mean? You're doing that not because you don't want Brooke to have a good time, or I don't want Vanessa to be less frazzled or stressed, or I want her to have a better life. But at the end of the day, you're doing it because you're trying to get something out of it. Not necessarily on purpose, not necessarily consciously, right? But I do it all the time. I'm like, I'm going to take care of this, in the back of my mind going, well, maybe that'll make Vanessa happy, and then maybe that'll lead to other things. And maybe I'll be happy. But you know what I mean? Like, I think about that all the time, and it's really hard when you talk about dying to self, and I've been reading a lot about this. Like, man, it's the hardest thing in the world to do, because if you really think about that, it should, doing something for her love language, or for Brooke's or yours or mine or whoever's, should just be, this is how Jesus loves us. This is how we are supposed to love, because this is how we've been loved. And to do it only for that. Oh, but that is so, like, to your point, like, unbelievably hard. When you take that one component and you go, wait a minute, there's a seed in the back of my mind that's not good. And if I really thought about it, I'm not doing this for the right reasons, even though the outcome might be great. It's not the right reasons. And it's always going to be a struggle. And I've been dealing with this more and more and more and more lately, to go, this hurts. It's bad. Like, really, when you think about it, if people would stop for a second and go, let me really think about my motives for everything I do. Oof. You would be like, I don't know, I shouldn't say you. I would be.
We'll say we.
Mm-hmm.
I would be in the dumps going, man, my motives were not what I thought they were. My intentions.
Yep.
I'd love to hear Brooke's thought on that. But my intentions were not what I thought. I was fooled by my intentions, and my intentions were lying to me. Because your heart never lies to you, right? I mean, so
when people say, you follow your heart.
It's really bad advice.
It's bad advice. That's really bad advice.
Yeah, I agree. How about you, Vanessa?
I was like, Brooke, I didn't necessarily take the question to mean, our bank accounts. But I think this applies to me as well. I think one of the fastest ways for me to let somebody drain my bank account is to take things personally. And I've been working really hard for probably the past 2 years on not taking things personally, whether it's him or anybody else. Because oftentimes things that he will do or say, he's not doing it to hurt me. I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say that I don't think your intentions
most of the time
are to hurt me. And if I stop and think about other things that you have going on, or other stressors, or things that were in your past that led you to behave a certain way under certain circumstances, it's not me. It's not because of me. And I can be much more empathetic and allow you to make more deposits if I don't take things personally.
Because when you take things personally, you put up a wall.
Yes, you tried to protect yourself from those hurts that you perceive are being maliciously inflicted, and most of the time it has nothing to do with you.
So no matter what he does, he can't really make a deposit because the bank is closed, so to speak.
Right. It's been robbed. There's nothing left in the vault. It's been robbed, shut down.
So the idea is in tearing down the wall of self-protection, but it's so easy to put it right back up because of circumstances, but at least you're aware of it and you've shared it. So,
and I'm sure Charles will tell you, I'm not always good at it. I try to keep it closer in my mind now, but I'm not always good at it. Sometimes I take things very personally, but I try not to.
That's honest. I appreciate y'all's honesty. So everyone gets to turn on this next question I want to ask you. What are one or two big growth areas for you that could help you make more deposits and less withdrawals in your marriage? So Charles, I want to let you go first.
Sorry, that was really loud, wasn't it? The biggest thing for me, and no shock to anybody who knows me, but slowing down and putting Vanessa first. I have not. So we've been married 23, not 24. It'll be 24 this year, but not as close as you guys. We're a couple months behind, but I think in 23 years I've never slowed down and put her first the way I needed to. We were talking about this the other night on the sofa. When we were doing other things, yeah.
You don't have to explain.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh my word.
There was nothing there. We were actually having conversation, but
Conversation. No, I'm just kidding.
With some unspoken prayer requests, we got you.
with good intentions.
I'm totally kidding. Okay.
Yeah. So no, but slowing down and putting Vanessa first, I don't think I've ever done in our marriage ever. I think there have been flashes that I've done that, but I mean, I would think overall in general, I've never done it. Not that I'm proud of. So slowing down and putting her first is by far the biggest growth area for me, and it's also the hardest because, like everybody else, I like things to be a certain way. I have expectations that are very high in certain areas, and I'm very selfish. And I think I'm exceptionally selfish when it comes to things in general. Not that people can't be, but I think when you're an only child, when you're raised a certain way, I think that lends itself to being a different level of selfish that other people don't understand, they don't experience. And not that your parents, we're raising an only child. So not that anybody tries to instill that in their kid. And my parents didn't instill this in me. It's just something that happens. And I'm good at sharing. I'm good at the things that everybody's like, oh, you're an only child, you can't share. I'm good at that kind of stuff. I'm not good at the emotional, at the center of the universe being me, because that's how I grew up. Because in our family, it was just me. So when I had a problem, the family had a problem. You know what I mean? So I've got to get better at this. There's no doubt about it. I've got to put her first if we want to. And we don't have a bad marriage. We're not there, but like if I want to be married in 50 years, I've got to put her first. If we're going to have a good marriage, we could be together and just be miserable in 50 years, but that's not how I want it to be. So I've got to slow down. I like you, probably to a hyper extension. I really go 100 miles an hour all the time, and it's not very conducive to our relationship. I've found recently when I've slowed down and done things for her or that she wants to do, even though it's not high on my priority list, we have a better relationship. No, that's not me. That's the dog.
Okay. Nobody's stomach is growling.
Yeah, no. That's good. How about you, Brookie?
I think for me, probably what would help in our marriage is if I actually said some of the things that I think. I think there are a lot of things that I think that I don't necessarily articulate. And so, when you were talking about the daily dialogue, I think making that a regular part of our conversation would be really helpful for me in making, more deposits and less withdrawals, because I think I do communicate in subtleties a good bit. So there are some times where I maybe think that I'm giving you what you need, but I'm not being specific enough or articulate enough for you to really hear it. And so I think that it would be really helpful for me to, whether it's, hey, look at me, I need you to hear me, listen up, and I know that's awkward, and it probably will feel awkward for me because my style of communication is not direct naturally. But I think that would be it. You said one or two, so one, that's a big one. But I do think a daily dialogue, whether it's on date night or whether it's, in some of the material that you sent, like, I'm not sure exactly, and that's something for us to talk about offline. It's not for us to hash out here. But whatever that cue is that helps us remember this is the conversation we need to have, I think that would be beneficial for me. When something feels contrived, my heart's not in it as much. I don't know if that makes sense. So, but if there's a natural cue, this is what we're supposed to do, that's a little bit better for me. So anyway, again, I said I wasn't going to hash it out here. I'm hashing it out here a little bit because now I'm rambling. All right, done. I'm stopping abruptly, but I need to articulate specifically and directly, the things that I appreciate about you or our relationship or what I see in you, rather than just thinking that you get it when I indirectly or subtly say things. That's my answer.
Well, being a person that's wired with a love language of words of affirmation, I can tell you that would be appreciated. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the thing is, just because you schedule something doesn't mean it has to be contrived.
Oh, I get it. And that's not what I was trying to say.
I have a further explanation.
Wondering.
The further explanation is we schedule a date night on a regular basis. But I don't think you would ever say that that's contrived. Mm-mm. I think it's starting something new that feels awkward. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's contrived. I think it's just the starting of something new. And it's just like when we sit down with couples and we get them communicating in a way that they're being assertive and listening actively, and they're not used to doing it, it can feel contrived. Mm-hmm. But it's really awkward, just awkward. And it's being comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So that I would say, if you can change the mindset of this isn't contrived, this is just something that I'm new at, and everyone has to start somewhere, then it's like you don't have to go, well, this is fake. Because I think that's what happens when you think contrived. You think, oh, this is not authentic. And that's not true. So, well, I'll tell you, I've got to make sure that I communicate subtly. I really struggle with that, and part of it is it's a foundational impatience of wanting to move forward. It doesn't always have to be fast. I just want to move to whatever's next. And so sometimes for me, I don't use enough words. I want to fast track it, and certain things I don't want to sit in. I might get bored. And I don't always show it, but then sometimes I do. I've learned how to mask it sometimes, but then sometimes when you're masking something low key, it's seeping out, and you don't even know it's seeping out, which nothing that seeps out is good. Oof. But I would say the other thing is taking responsibility for my thoughts and actions. I'm not trying to blame. I don't want to do that. So, and how I do that, I think for me is to live from the Spirit, live out the Spirit's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. So, I'm sorry, I don't mean to hit the computer. Bam. Vanessa, how about you? What are one or two big growth areas for you in your marriage?
I'm perfect. I'm just kidding.
Mary Poppins over here.
Ed Sheeran wrote a song about you.
I am 100% kidding. For me, it's a little bit, I guess, of what everyone else has already said. Putting you first. Gladly. And it is also a lot of communication. And for me, it is not allowing, I need to communicate in a way that allows you to ask your questions and not get defensive or frustrated by them, and understand that if I'm not taking it personally, I know that you're coming from a place of usually something good, trying to help make things better or be interested in what's going on with me. But I also need to learn to communicate to you what I need in a moment without getting frustrated and defensive and shutting down, because I know that that's what I do. When I'm not getting what I need, instead of, I don't have a problem with tough conversations, but when I don't think that I'm getting what I need, and I don't think that I can make you understand, or I don't think that you're going to accept what I need as truth or a legitimate need, then I take my toys and go home. So.
Yeah, the assertiveness and active listening exercise we do would probably be something that you'd want to practice a little bit more, just because it's awkward if you're not used to communicating that way. But when you say not getting what you need, what I'm hearing you say is that you need to be understood.
Right. Yes.
And so that's really a big part of that exercise, is to give you the space to say what you need to say, and then give, in this case, Charles, the space to be able to tell you what he heard you say, and even how it would make you feel if certain things were to happen, or just how you're feeling with whatever you're articulating, to understand what you're saying, where you can then say, yeah, that's exactly what I mean, or you can say, well, not exactly. And then say it again, to where then he can actively listen and then let you know what he heard you say, as opposed to what I've seen happen, not just with you guys, but with us, is sometimes I interrupt her or vice versa, thinking we know what the other person is going to say. And that's not active listening. That is what they call ritual listening. And I'm listening to a certain point, I think I know what you're already going to say, and so I'm responding before you're even done. That is what I see happen in 99% of the couples we sit with, and we've done it. So I can share with you what that is offline, but it's extremely helpful for those who put it into practice.
Maybe you could put it in the notes as well.
I could put it in the notes.
There you go.
Yeah. We don't have it mastered. We're working on it. Anybody that does, well, they're Jesus. All right. So I'm going to move to this next question, which is, it begins with a passage of Scripture. And it's a passage of Scripture, that's easy for me to say, that has been controversial over the years because of an S word. And I'm going to read this to you, but I'm going to read it in a translation that maybe you're not familiar in hearing it in if you've been around church. And this is Ephesians chapter 5, verses 21 through 28. I'm going to read this in the Message translation, and see if you can find the S word. Out of respect for Christ, be courteously reverent to one another. Wives, understand and support your husbands in ways that show your support for Christ. The husband provides leadership to his wife the way Christ does to his church, not by domineering, but by cherishing. So just as the church submits to Christ as he exercises such leadership, wives should likewise submit to their husbands. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church, a love marked by giving, not getting. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring the best out of her, dressing her in dazzling white silk, radiant with holiness. And this is how husbands ought to love their wives. They're really doing themselves a favor, since they are already one in marriage. So, Brooke and Vanessa, what do these verses mean for wives?
You get to go first because you haven't gotten to go first.
I'm okay with not going first. I'm okay with putting everybody else first.
You've had some really insightful answers today.
That's because I haven't gone first.
So now is your chance to not be insightful.
I think it's putting others first. It goes back to not being selfish and putting others first and allowing yourself to be taken care of, allowing yourself to be open to a different perspective, and submitting to the needs of someone that you are one with, and just like the verse says, you're doing yourself a favor. So
I thought that was good. You did a good job going first.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
You were still insightful.
Good job.
Yeah.
I meant it. She did a good job going first. I don't really have, she covered it. It really is that, and you talk about it when you do weddings a lot, you before me. That idea of each person saying you before me and operating with that mindset, I think is important. We've talked about this. I saw it heard in a Bible study I've done recently, not using the word submit, but surrendering responsibility to the other person. And you covered that, I think, when you said allowing yourself to be taken care of by the other person, allowing somebody else to meet those needs. That's really what it is, to say, I'm surrendering responsibility to this other person. I'm allowing myself to come under the authority and also the provision of this other person, the same way that I do for Jesus, the way that, I may not always agree with Jesus's way. It may not always feel emotionally satisfying for me to operate that way.
Sure.
But if I believe that he is my Lord and my King, then I'm going to say, okay, well, even if I don't, I'm going to trust that you know more than I do. And in marriage, allowing for that mutual surrender, I think allows you to then have the kind of relationship that demonstrates what would be God's design for marriage. But also, I think, what makes marriage satisfying.
Yes. That's good. How about you, Charles? What implications, or what does this mean for husbands?
I think it's very similar to what both Vanessa and Brooke have said. I think what's interesting is what Brooke just said, though, about authority and submitting to authority and what we're called to do. And I think this is, and I was reading something recently this week about that. And as a follower, part of our job is to put ourselves under authority, right? And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we look at, and we're in a worldview where that's not the case, that we feel like we shouldn't submit to anyone's authority. And I think when you do that, and when you come to that, and when you come to marriage with that mindset, that's where things go south very quickly, because everything that says, and I've had a problem with this passage over my life at times, certain ways, just like I'm sure a lot of people have, right? But if you really think about it, to your point, to what we're to do when we are followers of Jesus, I have to put Vanessa first, right? And I have to be sacrificial. I mean, you think about what Jesus did for all of us. That's the ultimate act of submission. I mean, you can't look at that any other way. And if you do, I don't know what that says about you, but I look at that as like that's the ultimate giving, right? That's the ultimate act of love, is to do that. And if I love my wife, if I'm commanded, because I am commanded to love her that way, man, that changes things. And it's not about being the head of the household. It's not about all this other things that people get so wrapped up in this verse. It's when you really truly understand that my job is to love her so much that I'm willing to do whatever I can to create that relationship. And at the end of the day, hopefully, that leads to bigger and better things eternally. And there's so many things that are implicated and wrapped up into that, but I've got to put her first, and it has to be sacrificial when I do it. It can't be because I'm the head of the household and I'm supposed to love her the way it can be that way. It has to be, I love her so much that I'm willing to completely die and become crucified for her. Like, that's what Jesus did for us. So that's my job as a husband. And I think when you look at it that way, things should become pretty clear.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get the king of the castle vibes, and that's not accurate. It's not what Paul is communicating. In fact, when you read the NIV version of this, or other versions that are similar, the beginning of this is submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So there is a mutual submission that takes place, even though while there may be different responsibilities that take place in the context of marriage. What I see and when I look at this is servant leadership, which is I'm serving you. I'm putting your needs before my own. I think Jesus' example at the Last Supper of washing the disciples' feet, when that was seen as the lowliest task that he could have had in that moment. Of all the people present, he took the lowest position when he deserved to be elevated to the highest. That's the kind of leadership that I see coming out of this, and loving your wives as Jesus loved the church. Also, I see your words and actions are intended to bring out her best. And so that's challenging. Are my words, are my actions, my nonverbals, my tone of voice, are they bringing out the best? And I mean, I can't say I'm batting 1,000 there, but I want to. I want to emulate Jesus and have that in my life. The other thing that really jumps out to me is we're on the same team. If I lose, she loses, and if she loses, I lose. So if I beat her in an argument, if I prove her wrong, I'm still a loser. And who in their right mind would choose losing and to beat themselves? An idiot. So this last question.
So hold on. So I think it's a great. But why do you think? And I say, why do you think people? Because I struggle with that as well. But why do you think people struggle with that so much, especially with like winning arguments?
Their sense of self it goes back to selfishness, but their sense of self-worth is tied to their winning, so to speak, their quote-unquote winning, their performance. I can tell you, for me, that's been one of my biggest downfalls, is attaching my sense of self-worth to, did I win? Did I do better than everyone else? And I don't have that all untangled or figured out, but I've made progress. It's like in the gym, I want to give great effort, but I don't want to sacrifice a relationship. I don't want to sacrifice performance, virtuosity, doing things right, just to say that I was top on the whiteboard. But I feel like I watch people do that. They sacrifice relationship. They sacrifice virtuosity and actually doing a repetition correctly because they
the
want
repetitions at all.
Or they just don't count right. And so I think sometimes it can be a genuine mistake, but a lot of times I think it is tied to their sense of self-worth.
The word that came to my mind was insecurity. That you think that you have to win in order to have value of some kind. And that might be, there's a whole host of reasons why, it may be wiring, but it might be how you were raised. It might be certain experiences that you had. You may have had a teacher who just so drilled that in that it just left you thinking, if I don't have this perfect, or if I don't win, then I don't have value. You know what I mean? Like, we all have things, I think, that cause those insecurities.
Would you have another thought on that?
No, I'm just curious. I mean, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this as it relates to politics, which is where it shows up the most in my world that I think about. And I'm just curious. I was just curious. I mean, I think it's easy to do. Like, I can get into an argument with someone as a libertarian, like, because we all think we're the smartest people in the world, right? So I can just win this argument, and then I'll prove that I'm smarter than you, which is easy to do in that situation. It's just interesting to me that I do it at home. Like, and to your point, I did it much more when I was younger. I still do it sometimes. But when I was younger, I did it. We used to get into knockdown dragouts. I say knockdown dragouts, so it's not that dramatic, but we used to get into conversations that I'm like, if I didn't win, I just kept talking until she just finally gave up and said, you win. Like, and that didn't solve anything. I mean, I think I went to bed feeling good, but I woke up the next morning going, well, that was probably not the world's greatest thing that I just did.
Yeah, you beat your wife in a political argument.
Right. Well, I did sweat well.
She waved her white flag.
She did at some point. She's not quite as much of a granola and eating tree hugger as she used to be. Sorry. I love you for that.
I love trees. I still hug trees.
But in all fairness, I've gone back toward the center a little bit more than I used to be. But I'm just curious because I find that fascinating that we feel like that we need to win arguments with our spouse. And it's not like I'm above it. I've been guilty of it. It's just funny. I just don't understand why we do it.
So, like, backing out of this and thinking, like, in just relationships in general, do we ever argue ourselves into something better with people? I mean, I guess maybe there are exceptions, but I'm thinking about this just kind of on the fly here. Do I ever beat you in an argument and, like, the relationship's better, or you change your mind? Like, oh, well, now that you beat me in an argument, okay, now I'm...
Not usually.
No.
Usually it makes me more stubborn.
I think it makes most people more stubborn. I think
it doesn't bring out the best.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's human nature. So it's like maybe a different approach then would be, hey, what do you think about this? Can we have a dialogue about it? And just because it doesn't come to a conclusion where it seems like, I've won because I've said the most words, or the other person's no longer responding anymore, and they're like sucking their thumb.
It can be like that lady one time that I didn't agree with her on the issue of Halloween. And she said to me, well, maybe one day Jesus will change your mind. So that's how you can just end. Well, maybe one day Jesus will change your mind.
And he didn't.
Not on the Halloween thing, but
yeah,
he has changed my mind on plenty of things.
He has.
So.
And that's a great thing. Like, Jesus can change our minds. And I think we can present ideas. I mean, like, even now, today, we may have presented ideas that challenge someone's thinking, and it may not be where they are. We're not trying to argue someone into submission, using the S word. We're just trying to present, hey, this is what we see in our lives and the lives of other people, and what we're reading, what we're learning through God's word, and we want to share it because we want to make life-giving connections. I mean, really. And hopefully we can make relationships better, and even our relationships are better as a result. Okay. So we're going to go to the last question of this Love and Marriage podcast. And this is the last question for you guys today. It's another all participation kind of question. In what way would you love your husband or wife to be able to describe you and your relationship at the end of 2023? Does anybody want to go first?
I'll go first.
Look at you.
Just because mine's one word. It's one word. Cherished.
That was in that verse too.
There you go. But it's one word.
Was that Cool in the Gang that sang that song? Cherish the love we have.
Wow. It was definitely not Brian Marston's.
No, I think it was Cool in the Gang.
I don't know.
I'm going to look it up afterwards.
I'm sure someone's Googling right now.
I think someone is glad I don't sing more often. Unless people...
Maybe she's sitting next to you.
It's probably the world. Charles, how about you?
Man, I really would like Vanessa to describe me as a husband that loves and cares for his wife, who slows down to put her first in all areas. I mean, that's a big statement for me, but I think that's at the end of this year I would like, and I just wrote down something else as you were talking, but I really would like her to be able to describe me in our relationship that we are exhibiting the fruit, right? So, I mean, I think what you said, and even going back to arguments, thinking about gentleness and self-control and joy and peace and like all of the things that go along with that, I would like for us to get to a point at the end of this year where, because I have slowed down and put her first, that all of those things can come out the way they need to if I'm really living the way I'm supposed to. Mm-hmm. So, I want her to know she's first this year.
You're sweet.
How about you, Brooke?
The thing that came to mind, and it may sound dumb, but the thing that came to mind is I would want you to know that I'm your biggest fan. So I could have said supported or, whatever, but...
No, that's good. You surprised me.
Really?
Yeah.
What did you think I was going to say?
I didn't know what you were going to say. No, and I'm genuinely surprised, and that's not a bad thing. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
I would like you to be able to describe me as more gentle. That would be a win. I think as far as our relationship, I wrote down a few things. Full of life. I think life-giving has been something we've talked about a lot. Full of love, fun, nurturing, connected, and passionate. Yeah. So, more gentle, though, for me.
Give me more of that fruits.
Yeah.
The fruits?
Sorry.
Plural.
Give me the fruits.
They're
I like
nice.
it.
Oh.
All right. Well, on that note, we are going to land this podcast. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to engage with us on the F4 podcast today. I know that we are just scratching the surface with this topic. There's so much more we could have covered, but we're not going to take any more time to do it. So maybe in the future, we'll talk more about marriage or relationships. If there's something else you want to hear in regards to this topic or any topic, we'd love your feedback. So be sure to email us, message us on Instagram. But thanks for being a part of this discussion on love and marriage today. I also want to invite you to follow us on social media, like and share the podcast if you think it can be helpful to someone else in their relationships. And please give us specific feedback, even on this podcast, past podcast, so we can continue to help improving what we're able to provide for you guys who are watching and listening with us. So thanks again for being here today or another day. And we look forward to being with you maybe next month if we can get on a roll here. So till then, goodbye.